The first time Ethan mentioned his new friend, Sarah thought it was just an imaginary playmate, until he said the boy lived in the grave behind their house. "Mom, there's someone standing by the grave." Sarah dropped the box she was carrying. The word sent a chill down her spine. She turned to her son, Ethan, who stood barefoot in the backyard, pointing at the single weathered gravestone near the towering oak tree. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and a breeze rustled through the branches. The grave had been there long before they moved in. The realtor had assured them it was just an old, forgotten burial site. Nothing to worry about. But now, Ethan's wide eyes were locked onto something Sarah couldn't see. 3 days earlier, the Thompsons had arrived at their new home, a charming 2-story house on the outskirts of town. It was old, built in the early 1900s, but it had a character. Hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and a sprawling backyard. It was everything they had hoped for. Perfect place for a fresh start, Sarah had told her husband, Mark, as they unloaded the moving truck. Ethan, only 6 years old, had run excitedly through the house, picking his bedroom and exploring every corner. But when he stepped into the backyard, his excitement faded. He had stopped, staring at the grave as if it were something alive. Sarah had tried to reassure him. "It's just an old grave, sweetheart. Probably from a long time ago. Nothing scary about it." Ethan had nodded, but his expression didn't change. The first night in the house was uneventful. Boxes still needed to be unpacked, furniture needed to be arranged, and exhaustion took over. By midnight, the entire family was asleep, but at 3:12 a.m., Sarah woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost like the rustling of leaves, but there was a distinct voice beneath it, a child's voice. She sat up, listening. The sound was coming from Ethan's room. Her heart pounded as she got out of bed, careful not to wake Mark. The hallway was dimly lit by the moonlight seeping through the windows. She pushed Ethan's door open and found him sitting up in bed, whispering to the dark corner of his room. "Ethan," she called softly. The boy turned to her, his face calm. "He says it's okay, Mommy. He just wants to play." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Who, sweetheart?" Ethan smiled, pointing to the empty corner. "The boy in the backyard." Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The room was dim, the only light coming from the hallway. Ethan sat there, his small hand still pointing at the empty corner. "The boy in the backyard," she repeated, forcing her voice to remain steady. Ethan nodded, his eyes bright with something she couldn't quite understand. Excitement, curiosity, or something else. Sarah took a deep breath and walked to his bedside. "Sweetheart, there's no one there," she said gently. "You were probably dreaming." Ethan's expression didn't change. "He said you'd ever say that." Sarah's skin prickled. She glanced around the room, half expecting to see something move in the shadows, but nothing did. It was just an ordinary bedroom, yet the air felt different, heavier. Trying to stay calm, she smoothed back Ethan's hair. "Okay, bud, it's late. You need to sleep." Ethan hesitated, then whispered, "But he's lonely." Sarah didn't know how to respond. Instead, she kissed his forehead and pulled the blanket up to his chin. "We can talk about it in the morning, okay?" Ethan finally nodded. "Okay, Mommy. Good night." Sarah turned off the light and stepped out of the room, closing the door behind her. But as she walked back to her own bedroom, She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The next morning, the sun poured through the windows, making the eerie events of the night before seem almost silly. Sarah convinced herself that Ethan was just adjusting to the new house. Kids had imaginary friends all the time. At breakfast, Ethan was his usual cheerful self, eating his cereal and swinging his legs under the table. It was almost enough to make Sarah forget what had happened. Almost. Mark sat across from her, sipping his coffee. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her distant look. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to sound paranoid. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." Mark smiled. "New house jitters?" She nodded, even though that wasn't quite it. Ethan, however, seemed perfectly fine. He hummed to himself as he ate, then suddenly looked up. "Can I go play outside?" Sarah glanced out the window. The backyard was bathed in golden morning light, the towering oak tree casting long shadows. And beneath it, the old grave stood silently. She forced a smile. "Sure, but stay where I can see you." Ethan grinned and ran outside. Sarah watched him through the kitchen window as he skipped across the yard. He stopped near the grave and crouched down, as if talking to someone. A chill crept up her spine. "He's probably just playing," Mark said, noticing her concern. "It's normal for kids to have imaginary friends." "Yeah," Sarah murmured, but she wasn't convinced. Later that afternoon, Sarah decided to do some research. She pulled out her laptop and searched for the history of their house. Most of what she found was mundane: previous owners, renovations, property records, nothing unusual. But then she found an old article from 1947. "Local boy missing, presumed dead." Her breath caught as she clicked the link. The article was brief but chilling. A 6-year-old boy named Thomas Whitaker had vanished from his home, this home, while playing outside. Despite weeks of searching, no trace of him was ever found. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled down. Then she saw the picture. A small boy with dark hair and a solemn expression. His eyes were eerily familiar. She swallowed hard. Ethan had been talking to a boy only he could see. That night, Sarah struggled to sleep. Every little sound made her jump. The creak of the old wooden floors, the rustling of the wind against the windows, the distant hoot of an owl. At some point, exhaustion took over and she drifted off. Then, a soft giggle. Her eyes snapped open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway. Another giggle, faint but distinct. Sarah sat up, her heart hammering. The sound was coming from Ethan's room. She threw off the covers and rushed down the hall, her pulse pounding in, her ears. She pushed the door open. Ethan was sitting up in bed, smiling. Sarah's breath caught. "Ethan, who are you talking to?" Ethan turned to her, his small hands clutching the blanket. "Tommy." Sarah's throat tightened. She stepped closer. "Sweetheart, where is Tommy now?" Ethan pointed to the window. Sarah followed his gaze. Outside, in the dim glow of the porch light, stood a small, shadowy figure near the grave, watching, waiting. Sarah's breath hitched as she stared out the window. The figure stood motionless near the grave, barely visible in the dim light. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She blinked, and just like that, it was gone. The yard was empty. The grave sat undisturbed beneath the old oak tree, its weathered stone barely legible. Sarah turned back to Ethan, who was still smiling as if nothing had happened. "Honey," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Who is Tommy?" Ethan swung his legs under the blanket. "He lives here." A chill crept up Sarah's spine. "You mean he used to live here?" Ethan tilted his head, thinking. "I guess. He said he's been here a long time." Sarah swallowed hard. "What else did he tell you?" Ethan shrugged. "That he likes to play outside, that he had a dog named Rusty, and that he doesn't like being alone." Sarah's hands trembled. Rusty. The article she had found earlier had mentioned the missing boy's dog, a golden retriever. This wasn't just a child's imagination. She forced a smile. "Okay, sweetheart, time to get some sleep, okay?" Ethan yawned and nodded. "Good night, Mommy." Sarah kissed his forehead, but as she turned off the light, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was in the room, watching, waiting. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She needed answers. Mark had already left for work, and Ethan was watching cartoons in the living room. That gave her time. Pulling on a sweater, she stepped outside. The cool morning air brushed against her skin as she walked toward the grave. The headstone was old and cracked, covered in moss. Kneeling, she ran her fingers over the faded engraving. The name was barely visible, but as she brushed away dirt, her breath caught. Thomas Whitaker. Her heart pounded. It was real. Ethan wasn't making it up. She exhaled shakily, looking around. The backyard was quiet except for the rustling leaves. But as she stood, a faint whisper drifted through the air. "Help me." Sarah spun around. No one was there. The yard was empty, the trees swaying in the breeze. Had she imagined it? Her skin prickled as she backed away. That night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the grave, about Tommy, about Ethan's strange conversations. She needed to know more. Once Ethan was asleep, she grabbed her laptop and sat on the couch, searching for anything she could find about the Whitaker family. She found an old census record. The Whitakers had lived in the house in the 1940s. Thomas, his parents, and their dog, Rusty. But there was something odd. Shortly after Thomas went missing, his parents moved away. No explanation, no follow-up. It was as if they had just disappeared. Shiver ran down her spine. She clicked on another link, an old forum discussing local legends. One comment caught her eye. The old house on Willow Lane. People say the boy never left. Sarah's hands trembled. She shut the laptop and exhaled. It was just an old ghost story, that's all. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Around 2 a.m., Sarah woke with a start. A noise, a soft, scratching sound. She sat up, heart pounding. It was coming from outside. Slowly, she got out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and made her way to the window. She pushed back the curtain. A small figure stood near the grave, scratching at the dirt with its hands. Sarah's breath caught. It was a boy. Ethan? No. The boy was wearing old-fashioned clothes, shorts and suspenders, a white button-up shirt. His hair was dark and messy. He looked up. For a split second, Sarah locked eyes with him, and then he vanished. Sarah gasped, stumbling back, her heart hammered in her chest. She needed to wake Mark. She needed to. A small voice drifted through the silence. Mommy. Sarah turned to see Ethan standing in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. What's wrong, baby? She asked, kneeling beside him. Ethan looked at her sleepily. Tommy says he's ready now. A chill ran down her spine. Ready for what? She whispered. Ethan's expression didn't change. To come inside. Sarah felt her entire body go cold. Ethan stood in the dimly lit hallway, his small frame casting a long shadow against the floor. Sweetheart, she whispered, forcing her voice to stay calm. What do you mean Tommy's ready to come inside? Ethan yawned and rubbed his eyes. He said he's been waiting, but now the door is open. Sarah's stomach twisted. What door, honey? She asked carefully. Ethan pointed toward the back of the house. The one in the yard. Sarah's heart pounded. There was no door in the yard, just the old grave beneath the oak tree. Taking a deep breath, she scooped Ethan into her arms. Okay, bud, let's get you back to bed, all right? Ethan nodded sleepily, his head resting against her shoulder. As she carried him to his room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching. The next morning, Sarah went outside, gripping her sweater tightly against the early autumn chill. The backyard looked the same as always, deceptively normal. The oak tree stood tall, its golden leaves rustling in the wind. The grave remained untouched. No door, no sign of Tommy. Had it all just been a dream? She knelt beside the headstone, tracing the name with her fingertips. Thomas Whitaker. Who are you talking to? Sarah gasped and turned. Mark stood behind her, coffee mug in hand, a puzzled look on his face. Just thinking, she said, standing up quickly. Mark frowned. You've been acting strange, Sarah. Ever. Since we moved in. She hesitated. Should she tell him? Would he even believe her? Before she could answer, Ethan came running outside, grinning. Mommy, can I play? Sarah forced a smile. Sure, sweetheart, but stay where I can see you. Ethan nodded and ran toward the tree. Sarah watched him carefully. He stopped near the grave, crouching down as if listening. Then he giggled. Sarah's stomach clenched. He was talking to Tommy again. That night, Sarah barely slept. Every creak of the house made her nerves jump. Sometime around 2 a.m., she woke to a sound. A slow, steady creaking. She sat up, listening. It was coming from the back door. Her breath caught. She nudged Mark. Do you hear that? Mark groaned, half asleep. What? Another creak. Sarah threw off the blankets and hurried toward the hallway. She peeked into Ethan's room. He was fast asleep, but the sound continued. She tiptoed to the kitchen, her heart pounding. The back door stood slightly ajar, moving gently in the breeze. It had been locked. She was sure of it. She stepped closer, reaching for the knob. The cool metal sent a shiver up her spine. Then, a whisper. He's inside. Sarah gasped and spun around. No one was there. The house was silent. She slammed the door shut, locking it tight. Then she backed away, her hands shaking. Something wasn't right. The next morning, Sarah decided she needed help. She searched online for anything related to the house. Ghost stories, unexplained events, anything. That's when she found it. An old newspaper article, buried deep in the archives. Local. Family flees home after mysterious incidents. Sarah's pulse quickened as she skimmed the article. It was from 1963, the family who had lived here after the Whitakers had left suddenly, claiming they heard voices, saw strange figures, and she stopped, her stomach turning. The child of the family spoke to an invisible friend, claiming he lived in the grave behind the house. Sarah's breath came in short, panicked gasps. This had happened before. She scrolled further. The family reported that their child would wake at night, speaking of a door that had opened. A door that allowed the boy from the grave to come inside. Sarah's hands trembled. This wasn't a coincidence. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number of the town's historical society. After a few rings, an older woman answered. "Hello?" Sarah swallowed. "Hi, my name is Sarah Thompson. I live in the old Whitaker house and Silence. Then the woman sighed. "I was wondering when you'd call." Sarah's skin prickled. You know about the house." The woman's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to listen carefully. The boy, Tommy, he was never found, was he?" Sarah's throat tightened. "No, that's because he never left." Sarah clutched the phone. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" The woman hesitated. Then she said, "Check the grave." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Why?" she whispered. The woman's voice lowered. "Because the door only opens when it's time for someone else to join him." That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat awake, listening, waiting. At exactly 3:12 a.m., she heard it. The back door creaking open. Sarah jumped out of bed and ran down the hall. The door stood open, the cold night air drifting inside. And standing in the doorway was Ethan. He turned to her, his eyes wide, his lips forming a small, sleepy smile. "Mommy," he whispered. "Tommy says it's my turn." Sarah's heart pounded as she rushed toward Ethan. The cold night air swirled through the open doorway, and the backyard stretched before her, eerily still. She grabbed Ethan's shoulders gently but firmly. "Sweetheart, come back inside." Ethan blinked up at her, confusion flickering in his sleepy eyes. "But Tommy said it's time." Sarah's throat tightened. "Time for what?" Ethan hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "For me to stay with him." A deep chill settled in Sarah's bones. "No," she said firmly. "Ethan, listen to me. Tommy is gone. He can't make you stay." Ethan looked over his shoulder, toward the oak tree and the lonely grave beneath it. His lips parted slightly, as if listening to something Sarah couldn't hear. Then, suddenly, the back door slammed shut behind her. Sarah gasped and spun around. The house loomed dark and silent. Mark was still inside, asleep, completely unaware of what was happening. But out here, in the cold of the night, she and Ethan were not alone. A rustling sound came from the base of the tree. The soil around the grave began to stir. Sarah clutched Ethan tighter, her breath shallow. "We're going inside, now." Ethan didn't resist as she pulled him back toward the house. But just as they reached the door, a whisper carried through the air. "Please, don't leave me alone." Sarah turned, her pulse hammering. For the first time, she saw him clearly. A boy stood near the grave, his bare feet slightly above the ground, his small frame illuminated by the pale moonlight. His clothes were old-fashioned, suspenders and a white button-up shirt stained with dirt. His eyes were dark, sunken pools, not menacing, not cruel, just sad. Sarah swallowed hard. "Tommy," the boy tilted his head. His lips trembled. "I don't want to be alone anymore," he whispered. "I've been waiting so long." Ethan reached out a small hand toward him. "But you said we could play together." Sarah's grip on Ethan tightened. She couldn't let this happen. Taking a deep breath, she knelt beside Ethan and looked directly at Tommy. "Tommy, listen to me," she said gently. "You don't have to wait anymore." Tommy's expression faltered. "But I don't know where to go." Sarah's throat tightened. For decades, this child's spirit had been trapped here, waiting, lonely. She glanced back at the house, at the warmth inside, at the family she had built. Then she looked at the grave. "Tommy," she said softly, "do you remember your parents?" Tommy's small hands curled into fists. "They left me." His voice cracked. "They forgot about me." Sarah shook her head. "No, they didn't." Tommy's lips parted, his dark eyes searching hers. She took a deep breath. "They didn't leave because they forgot you. They left because they couldn't find you. And they never stopped missing you." Tommy blinked. The wind rustled the leaves overhead. "I found an article about you, Tommy," Sarah continued. "Your parents reported you missing. They searched for you, but they never got answers. And I think," she hesitated, "I think you didn't know you were gone." Tommy's hands trembled. He looked down at the disturbed soil beneath him. Then slowly, realization dawned in his eyes. "I never left." His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, her chest tightening. "And you don't have to stay here anymore." Tommy's expression twisted with emotions too deep for words. His gaze flickered to Ethan. "I just wanted a friend," he murmured. Ethan's voice was quiet. "You were my friend." A single tear rolled down Tommy's cheek. The wind stilled. The air around them grew warm, almost peaceful. And then Tommy smiled, a small, bittersweet smile. The wind picked up again, swirling leaves around his feet. The boy's form flickered, becoming lighter, fainter. Then, with a final whisper, "Thank you," he was gone. The night fell silent. Sarah held Ethan close, staring at the empty space where Tommy had stood. The grave beneath the tree no longer felt menacing, just quiet, just at rest. The next morning, Sarah called a historical researcher from town. With their help, she uncovered what had happened all those years ago. Thomas Whitaker had gone missing in 1943. His parents had searched for him, but the authorities eventually ruled it a case of a runaway child. But Sarah knew the truth. The boy had never left the yard. An accident, an untimely tragedy. The specifics were lost to time. But one thing was clear. Tommy had been waiting. And now, finally, he was free. That evening, as Sarah tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mommy," Sarah brushed a hand through his hair. "Yes, sweetheart," Ethan yawned. "I don't think Tommy's lonely anymore." Sarah's chest tightened, but she smiled. "No, I don't think so either." Ethan snuggled into his blankets, already drifting off. Sarah turned off the light and stepped into the hallway. As she closed the door, she caught a glimpse of the window, the backyard, the grave, and the old oak tree standing tall, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. For the first time since moving in, the house felt like home.